Welcome to the castle, everybody. This is Nightsaber Z42, and today we're going to be taking a look at remarkable cults and their followers. This is published by Loresmith Publishing, I guess. This is advertised as for any tabletop RPG. And if you've been keeping up with the channel, I have done the previous two iterations. Let's see, we have remarkable shops and their wares, and remarkable inns and their drinks. Inns and their drinks was the first one, and was quickly followed up by shops and their wares, and now we've come full circle. We're making cults, and there is actually a Kickstarter going on for guilds by Loresmith Games, I believe. So, just to kind of throw this out there, this one is by far the biggest book that they have put out in the Remarkable series at 180 pages. So let's open it up and take a look at what we have. Now, something that I will point out at the very beginning, you do have an extensive table of contents. Like anything that you need to find is going to be in the table of contents. It is pretty much the index because there is no index. A few chapters, and by few I mean like 5 chapters with 3 appendices, and that is it. So the first thing you get is the introduction, and it just tells you what all of the different chapters are and what's in them. So nothing really special here. I think a lot of the bang for your buck with this book is going to come into play in chapter 1, the remarkable cults, and there's 10 of them. So let's take a look. I'm actually not going to go through each of these like I normally would in a typical review and just go through like what they're all about. I do have my favorites and I will point them out, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw these out there. If you want to know more about the cults themselves, then definitely pick up this book or the PDF. It is actually a pretty good read. So first off, we have the Justicars, and if you've seen Marvel's The Moon Knight, it's pretty much that. You have like this big cult leader who kind of judges people, and it's actually really cool. I will go ahead and point out the layout. First, you're going to have an actual explanation of what that cult is about, and a little bit of their history and the major players, which is basically the cult leader on the sidebar here. And then you're going to have some of their followers, like notable followers, things that would probably be as a mini boss if you were to encounter them. And there's a few of them in each of the cults. And then you have what that cult can offer you if you're part of that. So sometimes you might have like assassinations or information gathering as part of an offering and stuff like that. Then you'll have like different magical items or wondrous items that cult brings to the table, and it's very specific for that cult and some of the things that happen within that cult. And then you have rumors and secrets, and these kind of act like quest starters in a way, and not just internally within the cult, but like outside of the cult. Somebody wants something that's inside of the cult, or looking for somebody who might be in the cult, and they're offering a reward for anybody who can help out with that. So that's kind of the layout for each of the different cults, and it actually works fairly well, especially since it is consistent for the most part. Next, we have the Dreamweavers, and these guys are circus performers, and what they do is during every performance they have like some sort of a portal to another dimension where they start stealing the emotions of other people, and that kind of feeds their cult god or something like that. The leader is an elf performer as well, and there's a lot that can really place into it and is very ethereal, otherworldly, kind of like Cthulhu-esque, so very interesting. One of my favorite ones is the Temple of the New Flesh, and these guys are straight up, they want everybody to be mechanical, or warforged, I guess, if you want to take on Eberron. And so their offerings are basically turning your body into a construct. And what they do is they actually take the souls of other living people and they fuel some of their automatons. And that's actually really scary and crazy. You have Nox Libris, which are people who want to keep knowledge for the sake of knowledge, even the dark and forbidden knowledge. So really good librarians, I guess. Ordo Umbris. Oh man, I think these guys are your typical cult leader who really wants to control the political theater of the world. So nothing really too outstanding there. They're really good at spying and stuff like that. Prophets of the Void is also a really weird one. This is very Cthulhu-esque, where this hero from a long time ago was transported to another dimension, and he actually met with this god, and he managed to escape the dimension, but he brought back like a fragment of that god, and his son is actually the cult leader. And so basically this cult steals the minds of other people, like they actually control them, like mind control and stuff like that. So they also tend to really mess with your body as well. So like as you'll see, some of these people kind of look a little bit humanoid, but it's like this guy's got tentacles, this lady's got like 8 arms, so very interesting. Scions of Sardon. This will be your druid cult. They turn their bodies into trees or just different, not constructs per se, but living constructs would be a better term for that. So some of their bodies will like have mushrooms growing on them or turning into bark and stuff like that. Like you see the lizard folk here, it's got like a wooden leg that's all gnarled and stuff like that. Then you have the Scarlet Fleet, one of my least favorite cults in this book, mainly because of this picture. But I mean, this lady looks really goofy with those 2 teeth sticking out. And if you couldn't tell by that picture alone, this is a vampire cult. And not just a vampire cult, a vampire pirate cult. These people sail around, and their ships are really good at sneaking in and taking illegal goods from place to place, let's just say. Of course, there's a price. They like to turn people into vampires, but not just anybody. You have to have certain genes in order to become one of their vampires, because their lineage is decaying at a rapid pace, and they're actually controlled by a council, which is probably the most interesting part about them. Heirs of Salvia is a Fae cult. There's really not much to say about that other than that they're Fae people. The Seers are people who they have, I think it's Quicksilver. They put Quicksilver in their eyes, blinding them so that they can see all. It's really weird. But that's pretty much it. And they have all these really cool tattoos all over their bodies and stuff like that. But their whole shtick is that they're going to become blind so they can see everything that can't be seen. Chapter 2, bringing your cults to life. So let's say that you're actually making your own cult, or that you are picking one of these cults, and at the very beginning, you're going to see some stats like wealth, resources, defense, influence. What services do they bring? The classes that are disavowed, or people that are disavowed or disfavored, and then classes or people that are favored. What does all that mean? Well, that's actually explained in chapter 2. So your wealth is basically how much money that specific cult is making. And it actually has a nice table that will tell you from minimal to subsistence, which is only 100 gold pieces a month, to superfluous, which is 10,000 GP a month. So can I have some of that money, please? Of course, there are plenty of random tables like wealthy cult characteristics to roll on, poor cult characteristics, and then you have cult resources, so how much resources or what resources are available for that cult to pull upon, and there's a chart that will tell you from common to legendary. Influence and disposition, how much influence that cult has in the greater world. So they can either have just a local influence, or they could have an omnipresent or planar influence. And of course, more random tables. Of course, there is some disposition, so they may be racist, they may not be. That's pretty much what it is. Of course, if you are part of a cult, you can gain favor. Of course, you can gain hatred with that, and there are some nice little effects there that are played into that. Services and training. So each of the cults that are presented in chapter 1 have different types of services. That's kind of fleshed out more here, from prices to how rare it is, and a just better description of what they actually do. Of course, some things are going to be more forbidden, but hey, you're going to have to climb up the ranks and advance in that cult in order to get the good stuff, which is actually what this part is all about. And organization and structure, whether it's loosely structured or whether it's tightly organized and actually has, some structure like a council or something like that, or a definitive leader. Cult initiation is always a fun one. So you want to get into this cult where you're going to have to go through initiation, and it's not just going to be a simple hazing either. You're going to have to maybe carry out a tricky burglary without being seen, or slaughter a black cat, then divine the prophecy from the spread of its entrails. Receive a crescent-shaped wound on your back with a silver sickle. That's always a fun one. And then, of course, there's going to be some sort of a consequence of being a member of said cult. Sometimes there might be a positive consequence as well. Then you have your actual ranks. So there's 3 different tiers, from low rank to medium rank to high rank. And those are better explained here because some of the cults in chapter 1 use different terminology. And so the terminology is actually explained here. And then, of course, you have your cult leaders and different cult missions that you can go on. And the missions are just talked about here. They're actually informed here. So some of the missions that you can go on can be available to anybody, or they can be only available to cult members. And so there's a distinction between that. And then how to actually advance in said cult and what that all means. Of course, you're going to have to provide some sort of a service to said cult if you want to increase your rank, and that is actually explained here. So maybe one tier from low to medium would be to poison a well, and it has some specific requirements, and if you're successful, this happens, and if you fail, then this happens, and it's always bad. And whenever you fail anything in a cult, they are going to there's going to be some sort of penalties, whether it's a loss of rank to expulsion, death, or the loss of your soul. And of course, something that's actually really interesting is that they'll give you some symbols to use for your cults. So, every cult has like some sort of insignia, even if it's secret. These are just some different symbols and what they actually mean. Next up, we have creating your own remarkable cults. And if you are not the type to just come up with a cult on your own before you actually start playing. Like, I know when I was doing my Humblewood game, I created my own cult beforehand, and that was actually before I even had access to this book, so I did everything by hand. But if you rather do things in a random order, or just to get some ideas, then this is the chapter where you're going to be. So first, you start with your organization type, from mage, cabal, druidic circle, religious order, to martial order, trading company, or rebel group during a rebellion size. So then you're going to have to determine your size and wealth, and this will determine like how many buildings you might have, or how many strongholds you might have, and stuff like that. Then some of the common buildings can be things like an apothecary, and they'll actually give you some bonuses depending on what you pick. So like an inn provides rations and alcohol, as well as recruitment and rumor gathering opportunities. Or a workshop will provide access to tools for item repair or item creation. Of course, you're going to have access to strongholds, maybe if your cult is big enough, and there are different types of strongholds, like an encampment, or a castle, or dark college, or even like a tower, which is like a mage's tower. Aside from wealth, you're going to have access to different resources, and you have a number of special resources depending on your resource score, which is actually kind of in line with the total number of cult buildings. So I'm glad that part's at least not randomized, because that probably wouldn't have made sense. And an explanation for your resource types, like spell components. So maybe you have some higher level spells that have very expensive spell components, then that might help you out. Or even just some potions or spell scrolls that are single use that you might have access to here, or even just lore about the world in general. And some strongholds will actually bring, better defenses and stuff like that. Then you get to flesh out your cult backstory, starting with an origin, and then fleshing out their goals or their motivations. Where do they get their power source from? Whether it's a god or a deity, or, some sort of a ritual or something like that. Weaknesses and secrets, that's always a fun one. So the cult's magic drains the life essence from its followers, causing members to age prematurely. Or the cult is reliant on an exotic resource like dragon blood. Without it, the cult will cease to function. Then you have symbols and logos, which doesn't really make too much sense to me, but there is a random name generator for your cult, which, I mean, I probably would rather just look up like a random name generator on the internet or something than do this because it's very limited, I guess, in a way. I mean, then you get to determine like what your cult members are like, what their appearance is, what any like details from their body for specific key members or what they like to wear, personality wise for key members, mannerisms, background, secrets that they might have, any flaws or weaknesses. And then you have your actual followers, and you have things like common roles, like you're a tail or a watcher, a thug, a mage, tradesperson. You have some uncommon roles, which is your second tier, so things like an assassin or an imposter. And these people get more skills, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. And then you have your remarkable roles, like a champion or the archmage, or a high priest, or a general of an army. And that's pretty much all there is to making your cult. If you don't want to just think of it yourself, then there's plenty of rollable tables to roll on here. And then you have player-operated cults. So maybe your players want to play the bad guys, or maybe they want to be the good guys, but what they're doing is really bad, then this is where you go. This specific chapter right here reminds me of another book that I was reading called Wicked Ones. And in Wicked Ones, you actually play the bad guys, but you're playing as monsters like orcs or kobolds and stuff like that. And this whole section functions very closely to the way that Wicked Ones plays. And there's 3 different like phases. You have the planning phase where you kind of plan things out, building phase where you start to build your buildings and you start paying costs and stuff like that. And then you have your operations phase where you go on missions and stuff like that, and you gain different resources, bring them back, or you do what cults do. You're trying to go for your goal or your mission for your cult and stuff like that. So each of the cult types has an establishment cost. That's how much you're gonna pay in at the very beginning, and each of the different cult types do have favored missions. So keep that in mind when you start discussing that stuff with your players. Then you're going to determine where that cult is going to be located, whether it's in a city, a town, a village, a nomadic encampment, an alternate plane, good luck with that, or an island. And then you're going to have additions. So if your headquarters type is tiny, then it's going to have 1 to 2 additions, and it's going to cost 3,000 gold pieces. And of course, everything that you add on is going to have a cost in increments. So if your group that you play with has gotten to a point where they have a ton of gold, and they're looking for something to do, then maybe this might be something that they want to do. And of course, you can take like the idea of a cult and flip it on its head, so it's not such like an evil idea. It could be something good, I guess. And of course, you could always do that twist at the end where the god that you're working for is an evil god. So that's always fun. So your fortifications can be different defenses like traps, magical and conventional, arrow slits, magical locks, and stuff like that. And something that you should kind of know is that this is a for any TTRPG type game. So you're not going to get any mechanical benefits, other than like price increases and stuff like that. So if you are wanting to use this, you're going to have to do some work into actually putting some sort of a mechanical benefit for whatever game that you're playing, which is probably going to be 5th edition. Let's be honest. Although you can use this for any game. That's fantasy. All right, so then you have common key members, and they do have their different roles, as we've seen before. So this is just information that's already been presented in the previous chapter. So you have your common, your uncommon roles, and your remarkable roles. And then you have your building phase. And something that I'm really thankful for is that they actually broke down the cost is in a little bit of an example. So you have your cult type, and then you have your establishment cost, your headquarters size, which increases your cost, any additions that you have, location, minus 2% total cost. Fortifications, add something else, and then of course your total, and that's how much your players are going to have to spend in order to get your cult up and running. Of course, this can be in monthly payments because when you are building stuff, it takes quite a while, and there is a formula for that hidden somewhere in this chapter. And then once you get things going, you can actually start to go on missions, or you could have your key members go on mission and they can level up. Sometimes they will fail, and that's pretty bad, and sometimes they will succeed, and you'll have to think about leadership and morale in terms of that too. So let's say that you have done your cult for a while and your players are no longer interested. Well, they can disband that cult, or they can pass it on to somebody else. Or maybe your cult actually fails in some sort of a way. Maybe some heroes actually walk up to your front door and start harassing you, and now it's game over. There are some optional mechanics, but I mean, since this is game neutral, it doesn't really make much sense. And then we have our appendices, starting with creating infernal items. And this is where I would say that the whole thing about being a game neutral really comes into effect here, because without any mechanics like 5th edition's item creation mechanics, this kind of really wasted a little bit. Like, I can get that, maybe having alternate materials like mithril, which is lightweight, will improve stealth. That's pretty easy to figure out. But other than that, without any big mechanical benefits, it doesn't really matter to me as much. You have major enchantments, you have minor enchantments, but again, you're going to have to really play around with whatever game that you're playing with to really create some rules on creating those items. And then of course you have the finished item, and also its final cost to create it and time that it takes to create said item. There's a lot of different tables. So like maybe your item has a flaw, or it has an origin, or in the past the item did this, curses, armor curses, clothing curses, lots of curses, and schemes and stuff like that. And then you actually have your different magic items that don't fit into the previous cults that we've seen. And so these are definitely worth a look at. But of course, you're going to have to create some sort of mechanical benefit in whatever game that you're playing, because it doesn't really tell you a whole lot much other than this is what it can do. Actually, quite a few number of items that are very interesting. And at the very end, you have your cult headquarters map. So the 10 different cults get a map. Ordo Umbris, the Sign of Sardon, the Seers, Dreamweavers, Scarlet Fleet, Nox Libris, the Justicars, Temple of the New Flesh, Prophets of the Void, and Salvia. And of course, you're probably going to want to get the PDF version of this book if you are wanting to utilize those maps. And the maps are definitely interesting to look at. And of course, at the very end, we have your early bird backers. And I'm actually in this for once. I'm like 800 and something, so there we go. That is Remarkable Cults and Their Followers. Now, this falls in a very niche category, and that is, of course, cults. I mean, with shops and inns, that's pretty much standard in any game that you're going to play. There's a lot of things that you could use in either of those two books, and I actually have used them in those two books. Now, whether or not you get this is going to be dependent on if you're actually going to use it. I actually had a use for this, but would I use this in maybe like a sci-fi game? I don't know. This is very much fantasy-esque, even though it is game neutral. So if you have a need for cults, or you want to take one of the 10 pre-written cults, or you want to make up your own cult, then this would definitely be a pickup for you. If you're looking for more items, well, there's other places to go for more magical items, but I will say the magic items that are listed in here are actually pretty cool and rather unique, even if there are no mechanical benefits. I mean, 5th edition is really easy that you can just take parts that you want and plug them in. So it's not that big of a deal that, it doesn't say, hey, this thing gives you advantage on this, or this gives you a bonus to whatever. It's fairly easy to follow with the wording of the items themselves, where you can actually come up with some sort of a mechanical benefit that will benefit your players. So other than that, that is Remarkable Cults and their followers. Feel free to leave a comment down below, give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and subscribe if you would like to see more, and I will see you guys in the next video.